My golden sister stole my childhood and tried to steal my wedding, so I got the ultimate revenge. So, for as long as I can remember, my parents loved my sister way more than me. And I don't mean in some subtle way. If my sister accused me of something, they'd believe her instantly and punish me. If I accused her of anything, even with undeniable proof, they wouldn't believe me. They'd find a way to give her a slap on the wrist and somehow make it my fault. My birthday cake always had to be the flavor she liked. It didn't matter that I hated it. Her cake? Whatever she wanted. They always bought her a little more than they bought me. We went wherever she wanted to go, even if the event was supposed to be for me. My sister grew up spoiled and hated me. She used me as a literal punching bag. At first, she mostly ignored me, but once we became teenagers, things got really bad. I'm not sure what the cause was, but she lost all her friends, and her behavior went downhill. Whether her friends left because she became mean, or she became mean because they left, I don't know. We were never close. My parents loved bragging about her achievements but never mentioned her problems, while my flaws were constant material for their jokes. I knew she had no friends because we went to the same school, and I noticed she wasn't hanging out with anyone anymore. I, on the other hand, was pretty popular. My sister realized this, and suddenly I wasn't just a punching bag, I was someone she hated and had to humiliate constantly. She started blaming me for everything and accusing my friends. My parents stopped letting me see anyone, saying things like, "Your sister says they're bad people," or "Why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and hang out with the family?" What saved me from total isolation were my relatives. Most of them lived in the same city. I got along with my cousins despite the age gap. Once they invited me somewhere, and I sadly told them I wasn't allowed to go. When they asked why, I just blurted out that I wasn't allowed to have friends because my sister didn't have any. This got back to the adults, who apparently ripped my parents to shreds. Of course, my parents were furious at me later, acting like I'd been partying every night, but they finally gave me some freedom. It was worth it. My sister changed schools. I think the humiliation of the relatives knowing her social status was so bad, she demanded it. My parents agreed immediately, even though that school was way more expensive because it was further away. She managed to make friends there, but she never went back to just ignoring me. I think once she felt the power of how much she could hurt me, combined with her anger that I'd told the relatives about her, she never let go. My life was still miserable. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never invited friends over because my parents were so unwelcoming, or my sister would just accuse them of stealing something and my parents would believe her. I stayed close with my cousins, and eventually I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At some point, we broke up, and he came over specifically to tell me my sister had been flirting with him. By that, he meant she'd approached him in revealing clothes, batting her eyelashes, and telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was super annoyed and wanted to talk to me about it. Of course, my sister told my parents a different story, that my boyfriend tried to flirt with her, but she turned him down because how could she do that to her sister? Guess who they believed? My boyfriend wasn't perfect, but I believed him. I was bitter and angry, and now I hated my sister as much as she hated me. A quick disclaimer about looks. I haven't mentioned this yet because it shouldn't matter, but my parents are overweight, and since they showed love through food, my sister was and still is overweight. I am not, mostly because my punishments often involved no treats. Weight doesn't define personality, obviously, but my sister was already rude and spoiled. Even her attempts at flirting were bad because she never had to work for anything. She just demanded things and got them. Add to that the fact that she didn't exactly look like a swimsuit model, and even my insecure teenage self didn't believe my boyfriend would try to cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents banned me from seeing that horrible boy. I tried to see him in secret, but it was hard, and it ended. Then I got another boyfriend, and my sister accused him of flirting too when he rejected her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I pointed out that this was becoming a pattern, but they decided it meant I just chose bad guys. That relationship fell apart too. In high school, I started getting a reputation for being a tease because I was willing to kiss guys but refused to date them. Luckily, that never got back to my sister or parents. During all this time, my sister only brought one guy home. My parents spent every second bragging about how great he was and asking why I couldn't find someone like that, until he stopped showing up and suddenly became a sneaky jerk who tricked her. The unequal treatment never stopped. She had more pocket money and could go wherever she wanted. I couldn't. If I pointed it out, they said it was because she was older. But when I reached her age, I still didn't get the same treatment. And when I pointed that out, they denied ever saying it or claimed I couldn't be trusted like she could. They used her accusations against my boyfriends as proof that I was incompetent. Time passed, and she got into college. It wasn't a great one, and she had no scholarship. Since they only told me about her wins, I don't know where else she applied. I do know her grades were bad because we celebrated when she got a B. I usually got great grades, but they never celebrated, saying since I always got them, what was there to celebrate? Naturally, they promised to pay for whatever she needed for school. I was glad she was leaving. It didn't make my life easier, though. She came back every weekend, and things would always go missing from her room, or she'd invent drama just to make me miserable. Finally, my mom sat me down to talk about my upcoming graduation. She said that since they were paying for my sister's college, they didn't have money for mine. She told me it was better for me to start working and wait until my sister finished to see if they could afford me. Oh, and if I stayed at home, I had to pay for all my expenses, plus rent and utilities. I pointed out I could take out a student loan. Mom said, "Yeah, but since we care about you and you're so unreliable, we will decide if college is worth you taking out loans." I didn't know how they'd stop me, but I didn't ask. We didn't talk about scholarships. They had no idea what my grades were and didn't believe in me anyway. I just said okay. Mom clearly didn't expect that. She kept pushing. I think she wanted me to throw a fit so they'd have an excuse never to pay. But I just said I understood, thanked them for their hard work, and that was it. My dad tried the same thing later and got the same reaction. See, after years of this nightmare, I had zero expectations. I knew they'd find an excuse not to pay. I never believed they'd eventually pay after my sister graduated. I'd been preparing for college for a long time. I didn't go out much, so I had nothing but time to study. I saw college as my only shot at freedom. Well, the moment came. I worked my tail off and got a full-ride scholarship. It wasn't some Ivy League, but it was a solid department at a good college. Knowing my sister would hate this and try to stop me through my parents, I announced it on social media the same time I told them. I even forced myself to thank them in the post. Now they couldn't stop me because they'd have to explain to the whole family why they weren't letting me go. At first, they were almost proud and bragged about it, but then my sister got in their heads and they changed their minds. They even asked if I was sure I wanted to go. They mentioned my sister was struggling in college, and since she was smarter and more sensible, I'd probably do even worse. I stood my ground. They were unhappy, but they couldn't do anything. College was my escape. I finally tasted happiness. I still talked to my parents and visited for holidays, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could always use being broke as an excuse not to visit. During this time, I never introduced them to any guys. My sister dropped out of college. I know she didn't finish because they would have made a huge deal about it. She moved back home, didn't pay rent or bills, because that's different, they said, and started working at my mom's company through connections. It was all framed as a point of pride. Whatever. That's when I met my husband. You know how people say if I were in that situation, I'd do this? Well, my husband actually does it. I'm soft and often a doormat, and then I stay awake at night wishing I'd said something clever. I'm the type who cries when I get angry. My husband, he reacts instantly. He loves drama in the sense that he loves shutting it down. If he doesn't clap back immediately, that's when you should worry, because he's planning something way worse. He's the one who suggested I share this story. People were surprised I ended up with him, but just because I can't act like him doesn't mean I don't love it. I love that he does the things I can't, and he's great to people as long as they're great to him. When we talked about the wedding, we decided the ceremony wasn't that important because money was tight, and we'd rather spend it on our dream honeymoon in Europe. Since his family was spread out and mine was mostly in my hometown, we decided to have it there. We lived close enough to drive down on weekends to organize things. We sent out the announcement and a save the date months in advance. My parents, of course, demanded to meet my fiancé. I wanted to be tough and say no, but it was hard. The distance had made me think maybe they weren't that bad. When I told my husband we were going but I wouldn't leave him alone with them, he looked like I'd canceled Christmas. See, he'd been waiting for this. He even bought a high-quality voice recorder to hide in his pocket. He was hyped, thinking of all the ways he could reject my sister's charms, insult her, and then play the recording for the whole family. So he went to meet them alone, all excited, and came back totally euphoric. Honey, you won't believe the insane crap they wanted. Can we please prank them? There are so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he smartly said I should hear him out first, so I didn't take it the wrong way. So he went there, and instead of flirting, my parents and sister sat him down. After complaining that they didn't approve of him or my worldview, they announced they were willing to pay for my wedding on one condition. My sister had to be the first one to walk down the aisle at my wedding in a wedding dress. Their logic was that it was wrong for the younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister got to experience the moment at my event, with photos, the dress, a cake later, and so on. Now, a word from my vengeful husband. Hey, vengeful husband here. There is no greater fury for a revenge lover than when his favorite person is wronged. So, while my wife paints me as this quick-witted guy, I admit my brain almost short-circuited when these people actually proposed this garbage as if it were a grand gift. Even Troy would have accepted the horse a second time if they heard this. Once my brain rebooted, I had a catalog of insults ready. No, something in my soul whispered like the devil. Play the long game. So I told them I needed to think about it, see how my fiancé would react, and then I bolted before I could leak my evil plans. Wife back on the line. My husband told me with a huge grin how my parents wanted to make even my wedding about my sister, and he had the recording to prove it. I was in shock. The distance had softened the memories of how bad they were, and I didn't think they'd go that far. Luckily, my husband's mood kept me from getting depressed. We had a blast coming up with ways to get back at them, from the ridiculous to the doable. Then we called his more sensible brother. Our idea was to give them a fake address for the venue, but the brother shut us down. He said while he couldn't stop our revenge, that specific plan would be hard to pull off and might even lead to lawsuits. So we settled on the simplest plan. Pretend to agree, but then hire security to keep them out. But that wasn't all. My husband went back to my parents and said he'd thought about it and didn't think I'd be thrilled. However, he didn't see the problem, and not wanting the family to fall apart, was willing to help them pull it off. He pointed out that I hate conflict, so if they surprised me with it, I probably wouldn't cause a scene in front of everyone. On the other hand, a wedding is a big deal, so who knows? He suggested a compromise. They help pay for things, and since we'd be in public and I'd be grateful for the help, it would soften me up. He said my parents looked surprised and my adult sister literally started jumping for joy like a kid. It was a deal. Crucial point, my husband also claimed that because of some past mistakes with guys, my idea, I'm so proud of using their own words against them, I had become distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone to make sure he wasn't cheating. It was vital that nothing was in writing. He suggested coming to their house for all discussions. Thus began months of deception where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me while my husband and I were draining them of money. How? Well, instead of just paying and staying out of it, my parents wanted to be involved. Some things that were important to me, the songs, the color palette, my husband convinced them to let me have to keep me in line. But everything else was up for grabs, or so they thought. We'd go check out drinks and menus. We'd agree on the cheapest or second cheapest option. Then my husband would secretly take my sister to taste them, sigh, and say it was a shame we didn't want to take advantage of my parents' kindness, so we weren't choosing the best stuff. My sister would immediately demand my parents pay for the premium options. My parents would then tell me not to worry, that they would pay for the most expensive stuff. Same with the photographer and the flowers. My husband showed my sister the bouquet I wanted, and then sadly said how I actually wanted other tasteless flowers. My parents insisted they wanted the expensive ones and would pay. The dress was a bit of a snag. They wanted me to wear a hideous dress. Okay, not ugly, but totally not my style and didn't fit. We planned to say yes and just not use it, but my mom texted me about it, which meant there was written proof I agreed. We had to refuse in text and stand our ground. My husband went over and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my actual dress so I'd be forced to wear theirs. He pretended to agree. The whole time they stuck to verbal communication. My sister tried texting my husband, but I was the one replying. This confirmed his story about me being controlling and neurotic, so they fell for it and never risked it again. Oh, and my sister actually tried to flirt with him, but he played it off like he was conflicted. Also, to prove he was on their side, he pretended to tell them things behind my back. But he never told them about the security. It was hilarious. My husband and I, who seriously thought about not even having a wedding to save money for the honeymoon, were throwing this extravagant wedding on my parents' dime. LOL. My husband enjoyed the deception more than the actual wedding planning. I never thought I'd see a guy beaming at the thought of spending all Saturday driving to discuss wedding details with in-laws. Finally, the big day arrived. The plan my parents, sister, and husband came up with was this. Wait until everyone was seated, and since the bride is always late, my sister would swoop in before I could stop her and walk down the aisle in her wedding dress. By the time I found out, it would be too late. As for my dress, we kept some scraps of fabric from the alterations, and my husband took them to my parents as proof he'd ruined my dress. Then he said he had to get back to me because I was furious, and he needed to calm me down. He'd see them at the ceremony. We kept the real security under wraps at first. When the guests and my parents arrived, all they saw was a woman with a guest list. Only after the parents were seated did we bring out the heavy-duty security, a guy who looked like a literal bodyguard. We told him to let everyone in except my sister, and we even tipped him extra to make sure he didn't mention it was our call. 0 hour. My parents got a text that my sister would be there in 5 minutes, so my dad went and told people. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they went along with it. Once they were all in place, my dad stood at the start of the aisle like he was waiting for me. Meanwhile, a friend who wasn't in the wedding party texted me to be ready. This was because if my husband or bridesmaids started texting, people might notice. My husband's friend was ready to help create drama just like him, and she didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. So, as soon as my dad took his spot, the wedding music started, the doors opened, and I walked in. My dad looked stunned. He tried to look past me, but from where we were, you couldn't see the entrance, so he couldn't see what happened to my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw it was her calling. He just left me there, muttering, "Something happened." The room was buzzing with confusion. A friend who was in on it loudly asked, "What happened?" I lied and said with tears in my eyes, mostly fake, partly real, that he told me, "It wasn't supposed to be you." That's not exactly what he said, but my husband and I agreed if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look like a monster. About the tears, I'd love to say it was my great acting, but no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd actually leave me there. I wanted to believe the stuff with my sister wasn't real, just a massive prank. It hurt. It still hurts. The friend loudly continued, "What did he mean it wasn't supposed to be you?" So as many people as possible would hear. Then she added, "I'll go check," and ran off. We did this so she could stir up trouble with security and stop my dad from coming back and ruining the ceremony. Eventually, my mom left too. At that moment, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been warned this might be necessary. I saw him practically sprinting to me and I smiled. I walked down the aisle to the sound of people whispering about the incident. Some people left to check what was going on. When I got to my husband, everything was fine. He made me feel better by joking that my sad face was so good I deserved an Oscar. We got married. No hitches. My parents didn't come back. I noticed people coming and going during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone whispered in my husband's ear, and he stepped out. He came back later with a serious face, but whispered that he needed to hide before he lost it and started laughing. LOL. In the end, it worked. What about my sister? She actually showed up in a wedding dress. The guard refused to let her in. He told her she must have the wrong place because the bride was already there. And yeah, we tipped him well. Mój ojciec came over and tried to threaten him with the police, saying he'd never heard of the guy so he couldn't be working there. The guard welcomed the police because he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized it was too late and tried to demand he let her in. At that point, our friend showed up and started screaming at my sister, asking what was going on. She basically kept them trapped. My mom came back out with other guests. All my parents could do was damage control because everyone who found out was horrified by what they tried to do. Naturally, the three of them said it wasn't a secret and tried to blame my husband. That's when they called my husband out. When he arrived, he put on his best confused face. He denied ever agreeing to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he had, he demanded proof. And of course, they had nothing. All the texts they could show were about normal wedding stuff. My sister was screaming and crying, sitting on the floor and throwing a tantrum like a toddler. Mój ojciec looked ready to hit my husband, but guards and other people held him back. They kept saying there was no proof because my husband told them not to write anything down. My husband just laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, right?" Then he said he'd never agree to something so twisted. He called them horrible parents, said he wouldn't let their lies ruin his wedding, and went back to me. Nobody believed them. Some people caught parts of the show on video. Seeing my parents and sister fall apart in front of everyone who came out to watch the drama was glorious. After years of being blamed for things and having no one trust me, seeing them get what they deserved was the best wedding gift. My mom was crying. My dad was turning colors. My sister was still on the floor, wailing. They kept insisting my husband was in on it, but people kept asking, why would he agree? Why is there no proof? Why did they want my sister to do that at my wedding anyway? They had no good answers. Eventually, they were told to leave, and they had no choice. My dad had to drag my sister away because she wouldn't get up. Nobody said anything to me for the rest of the night. I think they didn't want to upset me, or maybe it's just because I was the bride. But everyone went out of their way to be kind. My husband said all that expensive food and booze they paid for definitely helped. We had a great time. My husband didn't keep his angry face on for long before he was smiling again. Afterward, we went to a hotel to get some sleep before our flight. By the way, my parents offered to pay for our plane tickets, but we figured that was too risky since they could try to cancel them or something. So we declined. Since then, they've tried to contact me. I refused to pick up because my husband insisted on keeping everything in text. Smart move. Because my sister finally messaged me. I won't repeat it all because she was totally unhinged. But the main part was her blaming me for her humiliation, calling my husband a two-faced snake who tricked them for months, and saying she's sure he'll cheat on me, probably with her. My husband wants to print that out and hang it on our wall. He took my phone, screenshotted the call logs, the sisters' messages, and the texts from my parents demanding I answer, and sent it all to the family group chat. Everything's gone quiet since then. My husband was actually a little disappointed she finally stopped. We'll see how long it lasts. All in all, while I'd obviously prefer to have a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for the first time in my life, they didn't just fail to ruin something important. They actually got what was coming to them. People often ask me if I know why they treat me like this. I've wondered my whole life, and I still don't know. I tried asking when I was little, but they deny everything and scold me for acting like a spoiled brat. So I stopped trying. I've thought about a lot of theories, but based on what I've seen, I think it's this. I was an unplanned baby. They tried for a long time to have my sister, so she was not only wanted, but practically a miracle after so much time. But since our age gap is pretty small, I don't think they expected to have a second kid so fast and so easily. And they probably didn't use adequate protection after she was born. Maybe they didn't even notice my mom was pregnant until it was too late. So they ended up with an unplanned kid while they were still overwhelmed with a newborn miracle. And they weren't well off, so the extra expense probably didn't help. It looks like they just held a grudge, but I realize the answer doesn't matter. What they did was inexcusable regardless of the reason. Did they really think it would work? My husband and I have a theory that they didn't even want to do it. We think my sister threw a tantrum because I was getting married first when she barely had a date, and they made my husband that ridiculous offer just for her, meaning they didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd agree. By making the crazy offer and expecting a no, they could look like good parents in my sister's eyes. We tried, honey, but they said no. Unfortunately for them, my husband said yes, and they couldn't back out without risking my sister turning on them. Well, thanks for listening to the story. What do you guys think? Is this girl in the right, or did she go too far with her parents and sister? Let me know in the comments. Good luck, and see you later.